As we get towards the end of the book on hymns, the hymns are becoming less familiar to me. Some I've certainly not been familiar with. I'm trying to decide whether to do this one or not. I don't know if this one really has a hymn or not, but we'll try it and see here. Grace Crowell. I think I'm saying that right. Before I do that, did anybody watch the Ten Commandments last night? Big Charlton Heston thing. The reason I bring it up is that I watched it many years, and it hit me last night that when the death angel came, and obviously he had put the blood over the door, Pharaoh's son was taken. Of course, that's what broke his heart. He let the people go. And I mentioned to Wanda while we're sitting there, I said, Pharaoh was the firstborn son. I wonder why death angel didn't take him. Because he was listed as Ramsey, son of Pharaoh. So just struck me strange. I said, I wonder why he didn't die, because he was the firstborn of the Pharaoh. I'm gonna have to research that, I guess. Okay, Grace Noel was born in Iowa, 1877. She was another poetry writer. She spoke of a moment when she started writing poetry. She said she was out on her farm and something struck her funny. She said, "Laughter nipped a budding poet in me. I never tried to write another line until after I was married. I was a hurt child that day when I fell, and I never tried to write that until love and romance and home came to me. That awakened a desire to write poetry into me." She said, "I think my husband could have gone into bank robbing, if only he had continued his writing. I love being a mother. I love my home. I love my housekeeping. I was proud of every new article of furniture that entered our door. But then I was critically injured, much like the accident I had on my farm. After that," it says, "her life became one long series of illnesses and spending months in one hospital after another." And so she wrote this. She said, "It seemed to me at times that all the suffering in the world had been heaped upon my poor back, and that I was no longer allowed to run and play, tramp through the woods, laugh and sing and shout. I would never be able to lift my body again from those hospital beds and to take my place as a normal woman in the natural walks of life." So she said as she laid there, she thought of Robert Louis Stevens, and I didn't know this, and the asthma that threatened to suffocate him. So she reflected on his struggle to survive, and she wrote this. "During all those days of suffering and illness, that truly great poet poured out himself in beautiful prose and poetry, which during all those years became a source of comfort and joy to little children and to adults. The thing that made Stevenson great was his deep underlying sympathy because he himself had suffered." If you notice, almost every story seems to have that recurring thing. Just comes of great suffering or tragedy. So Grace prayed that some good might come out of her suffering, and for the first time since the age of 8, that's when she was injured on her farm, she decided to write a poem called A Prayer for Courage. The poem was sent out, and immediately, she said, the letters came back to me from fellow sufferers. The response she received gave her courage and vision, and she wrote this in response to all the letters she got. To think that I myself, who was a nerve-racked, pain-ridden mother, who found caring for a little child a task almost too much for daily strength, when my hours were being spent in a bed or a couch, could do a thing like that was almost unthinkable. The thought kept coming to me. I'd like to write poetry that will help others who are suffering just like I am. My English education had been almost negligible. I had never pictured myself as a serious writer, and yet I found myself praying to God to make me a poet, a real poet, one of the best, and promising to honor God in whatever I wrote, if only He would give me the words to say. Well, her prayers were answered, and the poems came to the light of the welcoming world. Over the decades, she wrote more than 5,000 poems published in 35 volumes, and she became in her time the most popular writer of verse in America. In 1935, she was named the Poet Laureate of Texas. I don't know what laureate means. Laureate. Dale Carnegie called her one of the most beloved poets in America, and so overwhelming was the response to her poetry that her husband quit his job just to handle all the correspondence. All this happened from a bed of affliction. She learned to go out and help people, but lacked the strength to do so. And so, in a profoundly significant moment, she wrote these words that became a hymn. Again, y'all help me out, because I had not heard this one. Because I have given much, I too must give. Because of thy great bounty, Lord, each day I live. I shall divide my gifts from there with every brother that I see who has the need of help from me. Anybody familiar with that one? I even tried to Google it, and Googled it, didn't bring it up. So I almost didn't share that one, but again, another poet, 5,000 poems, and certainly seemed to make an impact. Okay, Philip Doddridge is another hymn writer here. He was inspired by the passage in Matthew 5:9. That's from the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be the children of God. He said, for over 300 years, he was a noble soul who tried very hard just to become a peacemaker. That was his entire goal in his life, was to become a peacemaker. He was born in 1700 in London, England. His father, another prosperous businessman, and his first lessons came from his mother, who taught him Bible stories that were depicted on the Dutch tiles decorating the chimney of their home. Both of his grandfathers were ministers, though they died before he was born, and very likely that their legacy influenced him. His paternal grandfather was part of the clergy of the Church of England. In 1662, during the reign of Charles II, an Act of Uniformity was passed by Parliament. And the Act of Uniformity was a policy of some kind that said this is the way all churches had to act. This is when churches began to control what you could say and how you could carry on business there. Not only how the services were being conducted, but prescribing the use of a certain edition of the Book of Common Prayer, which was very powerful during that time. The clergy were required to publicly declare their approval of all the church's decisions or lose their positions. Philip Doddridge's grandfather stood against the King of England in defense of his principles, and of course was ejected from the church. One of many who left enduring the restrictions that he was imposed upon. He became a pastor of what's called a nonconformist church. Well, in 1626, Philip's maternal grandfather lived in the city of Prague. The current emperor had forced Catholicism on all the subjects, and as a Lutheran minister, he was forced to flee Prague because of the religious persecution. He came to England, established a grammar school in Greater London. His mother had died when he was 8 years old. At the age of 13, his father died, and now Philip was an orphan. Only one of his siblings had survived to childhood. So he attends school, studying law, and then decided to train for the ministry. The Duchess of Bedford offered to finance his university education at Oxford or Cambridge to prepare for a position in the Church of England. Like his grandfathers, he declined, refusing to consent to conform and choose to retain his independence. His faith came at his mother's knee, who prayed for him daily and taught him to cherish the principles of his fathers. He never left those principles. In 1730, he married a lady by the name of Mercy. You ever met anybody named Mercy? They had 9 children, 4 lived to adulthood, and they lived and enjoyed a happy life together. In due course, Philip became a Presbyterian minister at a time and a place of religious contention. Yet, having seen enough of bigotry, he sought for healing and unity. He carried his own ideal with great fidelity and with success, doing more than any other man in the 18th century to obliterate the old party lines. So he began to set up a charity for teaching and clothing the children of the poor, and a foundation for the country's infirmary, and giving out Bibles and books among the poor. He was described as the first nonconformist. He was known as a peacemaker, and he believed all denominations, all Christians everywhere, should work together. So in addition to his duties as a congregational minister, he managed to open up a theological academy that trained 200 men to be ministers, all in nonconformist churches. He had the reputation of making every day count, and he wrote 400 hymns, again, most to accompany his sermons, and was a friend and admirer of hymn writer Isaac Watts. Isaac Watts, what did he write? I know we looked at him, I think. But anyway, he wrote the following, didn't really give me the name of it here. Oh, here it is, I'm sorry. How Gentle God's Commands. Again, heard this one? Okay. How gentle God's commands, how kind his precepts are. Come cast your burdens on the Lord and trust his constant care. Beneath his watchful eye, his saints securely dwell. That hand which bears all nature up shall guard his children well. His goodness stands approved, unchanged from day to day. I'll drop my burdens at his feet and bear the song away. So they said he continued to write songs mostly about peace. And again, I Googled this under old hymns, and I didn't get a hit on it, which is really unusual in Google. So I was hoping my music authority would be able to help me out there. That hit, huh? Okay, this one I know you're going to remember. Yeah. James Montgomery. He was, just like the Philip Doddridge here, was known as the peacemaker. James Montgomery was known as the stranger. I always like to go through life being known as the stranger. Born in Scotland, again, son of a minister. Went to school in the West Indies. His parents were missionaries, and while there, he came to love poetry. But the poetry was forbidden at the school where he was. He again had a passion to write poetry. About the age of 13, he filled his first volume at the age of 13, and was excelling as a poet and a writer, but not excelling as a student. I don't know how you do that. How do you excel as a poet and a writer, but you're a bad student? So finally he was taken out of school to go to work as a store clerk. And at the age of 16, he decided, I can't do this anymore. So he found employment of his own choosing and decided to devote all his time to reading and composing poetry. He answered an ad for a bookkeeper at a newspaper called the Sheffield Register. It was during this time, again, politics were divisive and issues were the hot fodder of newspaper print at the time. He found himself drawn in to address political issues of the time. Because the paper was political in its views, Edward Gale, who was his employer, became a target for the opposition and was forced to flee America. So he took over the editorship and renamed the paper the Sheffield Iris. And in the first edition there, he says, ours are the plans of fair, delightful peace, unwarped by party rage, to live like brothers. But he was served a warrant and was convicted and sentenced to 3 months in prison because of sedition, which is causing riots. Because this is when the church was so organized and powerful that they literally wanted to control everything that you were doing. So he served his time, released, but then he got out and he found himself in crosshairs of the king again. And then he was imprisoned for 6 months this time, took his punishment, and during that time his health declined. And so he continued to write hymns, but finally, on Sunday, April 30th, he passed away. But before that, he sent this poem that became the autobiographical of the life of James Montgomery. And it begins like this: a poor wayfaring man of grief has often crossed me on my way, who sued so humbly for relief that I could never answer nay. I had no power to ask his name, where he went or where he came, yet there was something in his eye that won my love, I knew not why. You got that look, like you have a clue. Wayfaring stranger. Is that it? The wayfaring stranger? I don't think it is. But it's got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 verses. And it was put to music later. And the title today is A Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief. So I have heard of the Wayfaring Stranger song, but these verses did not click with me. But again, every bit of it was based on his lifestyle.
I just stumbled on one of the other ones that he wrote. And we're going to sing that one this morning. According to thy gracious word.
Oh, okay. According to thy gracious word.
To thy gracious word.
Did he do the music and the lyrics?
Just the lyric.
How about that? Well, I knew the name was familiar. Now, I got a lot of hits when I looked him up there. But, and I may have a totally different song in mind, The Wayfaring Stranger, but because the current title did not hit me, A Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief. And they said the inspiration for this story was from a thesis for a master's written in 1950 by Robert Williamson. So he was doing an autobiography there. All right, now this one you're all going to get very easily here. Catherine Bates, not the current celebrity Catherine Bates. Summer of 1893, she was a professor of literature at Wesley College in Massachusetts. She decided for the summer to go out to Boulder, Colorado to teach summer courses, and along the way stopped in Chicago to visit the World's Fair. She was particularly impressed by the displays at the fair and its hope for the future, particularly the White City, as it was referred to. She continued on across Kansas and arrived at her destination. When she got to Kansas, she wrote down this quote here in one of her stories there. One day, some of the teachers and I decided to go on a trip to 14,000-foot Pikes Peak. Everybody's heard of Pikes Peak, right? Never been, but I've certainly heard a lot about it. We hired a prairie wagon. Near the top, we had to leave the wagon and go the rest of the way on mules. I was, of course, extremely tired, but when I saw the view, I felt great joy, because at that moment, all the wonder of America seemed displayed there, surrounded by the sea. It was then and there, as I was looking out over the sea, like an expanse of fertile country spreading so far away under those ample skies, that the opening lines of the hymn immediately flowed into my mind. When we left Colorado Springs, the 4 stanzas were penciled in my notebook, together with other memoranda in verse and prose of the trip. My work was soonly aborted, with time and attention again, and I simply laid the notebook aside. I don't even remember paying attention to those verses until the second summer following, and I copied them out and I sent them to a periodical called The Congregationalist. And they first appeared in print July 4th, 1895. The hymn attracted an unexpected amount of attention. It was almost at once set to music by Silas Pratt. Other tunes were written for words, and so many requests came to me, with still increasing frequency, that in 1904 I decided to rewrite it and try to make the phraseology more simple and direct. She was paid $5 for the sale of her poem. And then, in a remarkable turn of events, someone took a tune written by a gentleman by the name of Samuel Ward named Materna, I think I'm saying that right, Materna, and married it to her poem. Samuel Ward and Catherine Bates never met, but out of their inspired genius came a hymn that has moved the hearts of millions in America. Anybody want to take a?
Oh, beautiful for spacious.
That's it. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies. Amber waves of green. And that's rare that the author of the verse and the music never meet there. 1931, Star Spangled Banner was voted by Congress as America's national anthem. There were many then and since who felt that America the Beautiful, with its faith, prayer, and hopes for brotherhood, is more fitting as a national anthem. Speaking of the success of her poem, Miss Bates wrote this: that hymn has gained in these 20-odd years such a hold as it has upon our people, it is clearly due to the fact that Americans are at heart idealists with a fundamental faith in human brotherhood. And still today, it has gained a popularity equal with the Star Spangled Banner. I never knew that was considered for the national anthem. Anybody ever heard that? Is the title America the Beautiful?
Has in here, beautiful for spacious.
That's what it says. Huh, okay. I always thought it was America the Beautiful. Any thoughts, questions on that? Okay. All right, this name I know you know, Philip Bliss. That name pop for anybody? We got time for this one over here. He's simply known as the man who wanted more. Third child born to Isaac and Lydia Bliss, July of 1838. Lived in a log cabin, Appalachian region of northern Pennsylvania. They were of Welsh descent, but also devout Christians, always singing gospel songs. Young Philip learned to sing with his father and play on reeds and other musical instruments which he made himself. And from an early age, he just loved music. His family was poor and the opportunities to go to school were limited, but his mother taught him to read the Bible. Now that I've read a lot. The kids couldn't go to school, they used the Bible to educate them, teach them how to read. When he was 10 years old, he was selling vegetables to people in the community to help support his family. He first saw a piano in one of those homes, and he wanted to learn more about this fascinating instrument. Barefoot and ragged, he went uninvited to an open door into the parlor. He stood mesmerized until the music stopped, and then he said, "Please, lady, play some more." He was quickly sent out of the home, but that experience introduced him to a whole new world of music. At the age of 11, Philip left home to work on a farm, carrying all of his clothing done up in a handkerchief, and for the next 5 years worked on farms and in lumber camps, taking every opportunity for schooling. Finally, at the age of 17, he was able to fulfill his desire for more learning, went to school in East Pennsylvania, and he there completed his teaching credentials and taught school in the winter of 1856. Never leaving his love of music, that following year he spent the winter receiving his first formal instruction in music at a singing school. He also had a wonderful bass voice, and in 1859 he married the love of his life, Lucy Young, and they lived with Lucy's father in Rome, helping him farm. Teaching music lessons in the evenings gave him an even greater desire to learn more about music. The most pivotal moment came in his life in 1860 when he heard of a normal academy of music which would be held 125 miles northwest in New York. Some of the most notable musicians of that region would be teaching a 6-week training course for music teachers. But it cost a huge sum of $30, and there was no way the young couple could afford the fee. His wife's grandma, Allen, saw how heartbroken Philip was and told him the $30 was indeed a good deal of money. She then produced an old stocking which she had been dropping pieces of silver in for years. And it was more than the amount he needed, and she donated her money so that Philip could realize his dream and learn more about music. Over the next 5 years, he became financially successful, saved enough money to purchase a small cottage, and move his parents from their backwoods home to live with him. He had one successful singing concert tour in Chicago. Shortly after that, he was drafted into the Union Army at the end of the Civil War, and he served for a few weeks and then was honorably discharged. After sending a manuscript of music he had written to a publisher called Root and Katie Music House, he was hired and worked there from 1865 to 1873, conducting conventions, schools, and concerts for the employers. It was then that he began to write and publish several hymns, and some would say the dreams of a poor 10-year-old boy who wanted more were at that point realized. But as time went on, he began searching for more in life, and in 1869, he met the great evangelist Dwight L. Moody and went to many of his meetings. Philip Bliss then became acquainted with Horatio Spafford. Remember that name? It is well with my soul. Moody and Horatio Spafford both urged him to give up his job and become a missionary singer. In 1873, he went into full-time missionary work. After committing himself and all of his gifts to the Lord's service, he wrote one of the great hymns called My Prayer. The hymn became a favorite of Moody, and Philip Bliss was often called upon to sing it at Dwight Moody's meetings. The pastor of the First Congregational Church of Chicago, which Philip was a member, told the following story. He came in late one evening and he sat at the back of the church. Seeing him, I called him forward to sing the hymn, My Prayer. He struck the keys on the piano, stooped forward, and reading the words in the later part of the verse, more joy in his service, and I do not think I can sing that as a prayer anymore. It seems to me that I have as much joy in serving the Blessed Master than it's possible for me to bear. Bliss and his wife Lucy met a tragic end on the way to a revival, losing their way in a river railway disaster in Ohio in December of 1876. A trestle bridge collapsed, sending the train cars into the ravine and causing some to catch fire. Philip Bliss, who was known as the man who always wanted more, said this before his passing. The overruling providence has led me by unmistakable evidence to see and recognize his dealing with me through my life's journey. Truly, we have much to be thankful for. My dear wife, my greatest earthly treasure, joins in the opinion that we are and forever have been highly favored of heaven, and that we find our greatest enjoyment in each other's society when striving to make each other happy, and our highest aim is to be useful to ourselves and others, and to always live to glorify God, that we may one day enjoy him forever. And so this was discovered as his prayer song that was later put to verse. More holiness give me, more strivings within, more patience in suffering, more sorrow for sin, more faith in my Savior, more sense of his care, more joy in his service, more purpose in prayer. Is that called more holiness? I've got 2 verses. Good. Every verse begins with more. More holiness give. I'm trying to think if I got it right. More holiness give me.
From 261.
269.
The whole security.
That's the name of it. More holiness given. Is there only 3 verses?
Mm-hmm. Bill, he believes.
Show him as the composer too.
Mm-hmm.
So he was composer and writer. Okay.
I've never heard it.
You don't think you have?
I don't think I have.
How about you? Mary?
It's not familiar to me.
Well, it's odd it would be in my head because a music dude I am not. But it caught me that every verse begins with more. And the last phrase, more Savior like thee, more blessed and holy, more Savior like thee. I don't know why it's familiar to me.
You went to Roanoke.
Is that what it is? It's a product of Miss Pearl and Beth.
Something.
I'm sure it came out of Music 101 class, which was not an elective, it was a requirement.
What was the
Philip Bliss.
Philip Warnock, 269.
269.
what was the event that we always had in the spring? It was kind of a time to refresh and renew, and it was,
I think it was called a time of refreshing.
is that what it was
I
called?
think that's what it was called. How did you say that?
And Beth, we sang, There Is a Bomb in
There's a bomb in Gilead.
which is a very unusual song, but that was what we sang. That,
I didn't even know what a bomb was.
but
But yeah, I remember there was a good portion of those songs that I didn't even challenge what the verses meant. In my mind, like, I wonder what that means. One of the camp songs, the horse and rider fell into the sea. Never knew what that meant. Of course, that with Pharaoh being swallowed up and his army being swallowed up by the Red Sea there. But we sang that, and boy, it had a peppy tune. Horse and rider fell into the sea. We're just singing it like we know what we're talking about. But I forgot about that. I don't know how long they did that.
yeah, well, we did it in '76, and I guess you were there then.
Yeah, I graduated in 77. Yeah.
But it may have just been something that the freshmen had to do that year. I don't remember, but I thought it was a very unusual song and tune.
Yeah, because and all the songs were not the ones that we're used to singing. They were
Yeah.
always different.
Yeah.
It seemed like they gave a history of them and a lot of scripture, a lot of prayer. Did Beth lead it? I think Beth led it, right? Or did Miss Pearl?
Beth
Beth
did that. And when we were doing it, I thought it was such a solemn song. I thought, I don't exactly understand how this is renewing and refreshing, you know? But if what a balm is something to heal and.
Maybe we should research the bomb of Gilead. Okay, any other thoughts? Questions? Okay, there's only a few more